So it's 1 o'clock, so I'm going to introduce you both. This morning we noticed that people came and went, so we're expecting the same kind of thing this afternoon, which is wonderful. People can drop in when it's convenient for them. So Debbie and I are really delighted to welcome you this afternoon to speak to us. Thank you so much. And I think everybody should be very pleased that they're getting to hear from you, because you're two people with the most wonderful range of experience. You've got great experience of mentoring, encouraging, spotting talent, and getting books all the way through from early idea stage to published titles on bookshelves in bookshops around the world. And I'm going to hand over to you both, and thank you again. And please tell us a little bit about yourselves, and let's get going.
Excellent. Great.
Okay, I'm Adamma Okonkwo. I'm one of the senior editors at Golden Egg Academy, where we nurture writers for children's fiction. And I also have looked after the submissions, which is getting finished manuscripts over to agents and publishers. So I've done that for a while now. And then Hayley and I run workshops, creative writing workshops. We have writers we mentor from their first ideas all the way through to submission stage. And we both do freelance work for publishers in and around the UK. So I'm delighted to be here. I'm an African myself, so I'm really excited to be here today, talking to people with similar interests and so on. I'll hand you over to Hayley now.
Thank you.
Thanks, Adamma. Yes, so I'm Hailey Fairhead. I've worked in publishing for about 20 years. I started out as a children's non-fiction editor, and but now predominantly I work on fiction. And as Adamma said, I'm also a senior editor at Golden Egg Academy, and working with lots and lots of writers to hone their manuscripts ready for submission. So it's a great job to have. I absolutely love seeing the transformation of our writers from their manuscripts that we get at the beginning of the process to that finished article that's ready to go out to agents and publishers. It's a real joy to be part of that process and helping nurture our writers to that point. So it's really lovely to be here today. Thank you so much for having us. We're going to talk today about various things, but I think one of the things that we look at Golden Egg, because we're so industry focused as an academy, we want you to think about what makes a winning manuscript. All right. What is it that you can do to make sure that your manuscript is something that agents and publishers are going to want to pick up and say, oh, there's something about this. All right. So Adamma and I were talking about this, and we think we've come up with certainly 3 things that you need to be thinking about. 3 ingredients, as it were, to make a manuscript really stand out to agents and publishers. Now, the first thing, and this is really crucial, and it might seem obvious, but I'm gonna really talk about this in detail now. I want to talk about concept. All right. You can have a beautiful story, well told. And unfortunately, at the moment, because children's publishing is so competitive, that can often not quite be enough. So you need to have something about your concept or about your idea, which is really going to make your story, make your manuscript stand out. What is it that makes your idea special? So a killer concept is absolutely key. Now, it sort of feels a bit sort of woolly, me saying that, so I'm going to try and pin it down for you about how you can try and figure out what that is and how you can try and get to that standout manuscript. One of the things you absolutely have to do is read widely. All right, I cannot stress that enough. And when I say read widely, I mean reading children's books. All right, I mean, you know, middle grade, YA, especially books that are in your genre and for the age group you're particularly interested in writing for. But read as widely as you can, and crucially, read books that have been published in the last 3 years. All right, because that will give you a much better understanding of what the children's book market is about right now. You know, the books that you loved when you were young, yes, they're important to a degree, but actually, if you want to have a good understanding of what it's selling now, about the children's book market now, and what children are interested in right now, then you have to be looking at books published in the last 3 years. So read. And also the added bonus of reading is that it will improve your writing no end, because you know, reading and writing, they are two sides of the same coin. The more you read, the better your writing will become. And I can say that with absolute conviction, because I see writers whose work improves through the courses that we do. And one of the reasons that improves is because we impress upon them so much the reading that they need to do. Okay, so you've done your reading, you're doing your reading, and hopefully you're getting a greater understanding of the sort of concepts and ideas that children are really excited about, that agents and publishers are excited about. So then you need to start thinking about what it is that makes your novel unique. So why is this middle grade fantasy that you're writing different from any other middle grade fantasy that's out there? Why is this young adult romance that you're writing distinctive? What is going to make agents stand up and take notice? It could be the themes that you're looking at, which are particularly relevant to children today. That is one way you can really, you know, get agents and publishers interested. It could be that you're looking at something from a completely new perspective, all right? Or it could be something about your characters that really stands out, and we'll talk about character a little bit more in a minute. But it's all about thinking about what brilliant. It's called Charlie Changes into a Chicken, and it's by Sam Copeland. It's a story for 8 to 10-year-olds, so it's sort of younger middle grade. And it's actually about a little boy called Charlie who changes into different animals when he gets anxious. All right. And what's great about this story is that it looks at childhood anxiety in a really sort of fresh way. It's also a theme that's quite relevant right now, but it's also completely hilarious, which is just an added bonus. I mean, the first time I read it, I was properly crying with laughter. So Charlie Changes into a Chicken is a really good example of something that it has a really interesting hook. Charlie changes into animals when he gets anxious, and it's also looking at that theme, which is something which is really relevant to children now. So I think, you know, that sort of sums up what I wanted to say about concept. It's absolutely essential to have a strong concept. So I want you to be thinking about what it is that makes your story different and how you can make your story stand out from the crowd. I'll pass over to Adamma now, because I know she's going to be talking about voice, and actually Charlie Changes into a Chicken is a really good example of fantastic voice. So Adamma, voice.
Yes, so voice. And the reason why we're talking about voice specifically is that sometimes you have your concept all down pats. We've sent it to an agent. The agent is excited. They say, send me the manuscript. And more often than not, the emails I get back are, wonderful story. Everything is in place. I just didn't fall in love with the voice. And this is something always say when we have regular chats, what are you looking for? And they say, oh, I don't know. It's just got to have a great voice. And it seems like this is one of the trickiest concepts to pin down. So knowing what it is or what people are talking about when they talk about voice is really important. So for me, what I would say is that voice is that unique voice you hear when, or you feel when you're reading a book. So it comes from a deep engagement with characters. So you're reading the book and you feel you know this character really well. You know, that quality that makes you go, don't stop, don't take another step, you know? And then there's your authorial voice, which when it works very well with the character voice is amazing and transporting and really, really creates an immersive experience for your reader. So in thinking about voice, you think about your characters. Do you know these characters inside out? How would they react in every situation? Would they, so you give them a shock. Do they laugh nervously? Can you hear, does your reader get that? Oops, do they know? Have you sent it so that you feel like you're walking through the story with this character? And that comes from spending the time and really, really bringing those characters to life. And it feels like an obvious thing to say, but pinning it down and really bringing it out so that it feels like someone you know and recognizable is something we really need to pay attention to. And then for the flip side, for this group, what I would say is, you know, we've said read, 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 and then obviously there are underrepresented voices in fiction, you know, being African voices. And what I would say in this situation is your unique voice is actually what we're looking for. Don't try to be the next JK. That's our voice. Your own voice is needed. It's original. Lean into your voice because that's what we want. And that's what will bring those stories alive and translate to a very wide audience. So, as I said, it's really, really closely linked to character. So I'll pass you back to Hayley to talk about character and we'll keep going.
Brilliant. Thanks, Adamma. Yeah, voice. Don't try to be like any other author. Be you. Yes, so, but character. Yes, let's talk about character. So important to know your main protagonist really, really well. We talk a lot about character at Golden Egg and how to develop character. The importance of character to a young reader is absolutely crucial. And I'm going to sort of illustrate that a little bit by asking you to think about stories that you read when you were young. Now, obviously, we've been talking about the books you need to be reading now, but I just want you to briefly transport yourself back and just think about perhaps a character from a story that really stuck with you. And I think if you think about that character, if you think about the story, it's the character that sticks with you. It's not necessarily what happened in the story. It's not the plot as such, it's the character themselves. So if I was to think of a particular character that I loved and still love from a book I read when I was young, it would have to be Anne of Green Gables. And for me, I can't necessarily remember absolutely everything that happened to Anne during the story, but I remember her fiery character and I remember how she used to get into scrapes and difficulties and troubles. And I remember how her heart was always in the right place. And for me, it was that emotional connection with her that I had, which has lived with me and stuck with me, and which made her come alive for me so that she still lives in my memory. And that is what you need to think about trying to do with your main character, which is tricky, easier said than done, but we'll talk about how you might do that in a second. You know, it's really important to try and get your readers to engage emotionally with your main protagonist. Another way of thinking about this, and it's something that actually I sort of dabble in a little bit of writing myself, and it's something that when I was struggling with character, somebody said this to me and it really sort of was really effective for me when I was thinking about character. And they said, you know, children will put on a t-shirt with a film character or a book character on it. And they are saying something about themselves by putting that character on them. They want to be like that person. Maybe they want to be, you know, strong like that person, or maybe that character is really clever or really bold or, you know, really confident. What are they trying to say about themselves by wearing that t-shirt? So think about what your reader is trying to say about themselves if they put on a t-shirt with your main protagonist on the front. All right, hopefully that will get you thinking a little bit more in detail and in depth about your main protagonist. So the only way you can really understand your main protagonist, and Adamma has already touched on this, you know, you need to know your protagonist inside and out. You need to know their backstory, you know, their family, what has happened in their past. You need to know their likes and their dislikes. You need to know the things that make them tick, what makes them happy, what makes them scared. And if you know all these things, then they will become a living, breathing personality. Okay, and then there will be a living, breathing personality within your own imagination, and then you can translate that to the page, and then that gets translated to the reader. And if you can achieve that, if that main protagonist can come alive for your reader, I mean, that's an amazing thing for a child, to have a character that speaks to them, who they can empathize with, and somebody that they can connect to. And if you know your if you know your character inside and out, then you will also know what they will do in whatever situation you put them into. So throughout your plot, if you know what your character is like, then you will know exactly how they're going to react to a piece of dialogue, or, you know, an event that happens. You will know what they will do, because you will know that character so well. So I think we'd just sort of quickly sort of sum up those initial things that we talked about. So what makes a winning manuscript? Concept, voice, and character. All right. Now we've got to a point then, hopefully, where we have this amazing first draft with this wonderful voice, amazing main protagonist, and a killer concept. So then we have to start thinking about editing our manuscript, which is, you know, where Adamma and I hopefully will come into our own, because this is what we do. So Adamma, perhaps you want to talk a little bit about structural editing to start with.
Okay, but first of all, what I'd say is that there are different types of editing, and it's important to remember that they're useful for different stages of the process. We will be focusing on structural editing because it's a really big part of editing, but I just want to touch very quickly on what the others are, so that you're sort of familiar when these terms are bandied around. So there is structural editing, which looks at your novel in overview and looks at the really big elements of it. Then we have line editing, which looks at your prose, your sentence structure, your word choices. And then we have copy editing, which looks at the mechanics, grammar, and a lot of the time when you say editing, people instinctively think of copy editing, which is really important, but it's almost like icing a cake before you've baked it. And really, you need to get the main elements of your novel in place, because a lot might change and it's for a later stage. And then we have proofreading. So just thinking about it in those terms. But when sometimes structural editing is called developmental editing, and it's really about developing your novel, looking at it, okay, what's the structure of it? Are you using a 3-act structure, which is very common, but sometimes you could use a 5-act structure. Which is more appropriate for this novel? What are you trying to do? Thinking about when you've got your structure in place, are the turning points. So when we say turning points, those are the big things that happen in the novel. So like the climax or the inciting incident, which is the catalyst to get the story going. So what's happening at each of those points? So in an edit, you look at all those points, those main turning points, and think, okay, what's going on here? Is it working? Are we getting the ups and downs in? Once that is in place, well, it goes hand in hand with character again. So you see, we keep coming up against character. What is the journey your main character is going on? And how is this happening at those turning points? So you sort of have to look at what those two things are doing. What is your antagonist doing? So you can have an antagonist or your villain, or you can have an antagonistic force, like an ocean so a good example is The Explorer by Catherine Rondell, where these 4 children crash in the Amazon, and the antagonistic force there is nature, the forest. Will they get out in time? So you could have that. So if you think, what is the peril? What is the threat? Where is the threat coming from? How is that translating through those turning points? So you think about your character, then you do that. Then you think about the world. Have you fleshed out this world your character is journeying through? How is it interacting? Then you might have, other little threads. How are you developing your theme? And those are the things. So sometimes people think it's done in one big edit, but sometimes you have to go through rounds of structural editing, and it's completely normal. Because if you try to do all those things at the same time, it becomes completely overwhelming. And then you end up not being able to write. So anyway, so that's structural editing in a nutshell. So think about really, I would say really think about in children's publishing now, we think about the inciting incident, the catalyst coming quite quickly. So that's a difference with stories that have been published that perhaps we grew up reading, that a lot happens, or they really spend a long time establishing the world before anything happens. But right now, we try to get to that quite quickly. So thinking about that, how quickly does my story get started? Then what happens next? So think about, those are the things you look at in an edit. Yeah. So I'll hand over to Hayley to talk about editing in layers.
Lovely. Thanks, Adamma. I think, as Adamma said, with structural editing, what you're doing is, you're trying to make a compelling story. It's all about making sure that you're creating a page turner. That's why, at Golden Egg, we spend a lot of time looking at structure, because it's all about trying to create a page turner. And getting the structure right is absolutely crucial for that. Yeah. Now, Adamma's already touched a little bit on editing in layers. And I think this, this is thinking about the sort of thing that sorry, hang on, I just lost you. I couldn't see you on my computer. I lost all the faces. Everyone disappeared. Panic. Thought you'd all gone. Okay, so yes,
listening intently.
Good. Is that feeling of could just be talking to myself? Okay, so editing in layers. Yes, so we want to try and help you to do as much of your editing as you can do yourself. And there are various tips that we're going to try and give to you. And one of them is about editing in layers. And I think, you've got your first draft in front of you. And the temptation is to start reading and then start scribbling. Oh, I'm going to change that. Yeah, I'm going to change that as well. And I'm going to change that. And what happens is you get massively bogged down and you can't see the bigger view. And that's what we need you to do. And exactly as Adamma was saying, the structure, taking the view up here instead of being down here looking at the nitty gritty. All right. And editing in layers will help you to do that. Okay. So yes, read your manuscript, but decide at the beginning, okay, I'm going to just look at structure and see, do I need to make this inciting incident come a bit sooner? Is my midpoint exactly where I want it to be? Does my crisis point happen just at the right moment? Is the structure working? I'm not going to look at anything else. Okay, so then we work on structure. After that, okay, start again. I'm just going to look at the development of my main protagonist. All right. Just reading through, just making scribbles is so tempting to start writing, making adjustments to other things, but don't do it. Just focus on one thing at a time, because then you will get that bigger view. Because if you've decided, right, I'm going to look at character, and then you get diverted onto something else, well, then you just won't remember where you are with that main protagonist and where they should be at the next point. All right, so edit in layers. It's a really, really useful thing. So yes, it would be structure, and then you might look at your main protagonist, and then you'd perhaps do another layer where you were looking at a different character, your antagonist, what's happening to them, and how they're, what pressure they're putting on that main protagonist, and whether it's all happening at the right points. And then you might start to get a little bit more down to the nitty-gritty. You might start to look at some of your world building, and you just focus on world building and your descriptions. And then you might do another layer where you're looking at, more sort of word by word, thinking about, well, can I show this particular emotion in this character a bit better? Perhaps I've been telling here a little bit. Maybe I can show this emotion to make this more dramatic for my reader. So editing in layers is really, really useful. And I think just from a kind of, logistics point of view, it's great to be able to print it off, and quite often if you've got lots of lovely colourful post-it notes, and you can use those to sort of blue post-it notes, that's going to be structure, and pink post-it notes are all going to be about my main protagonist, and green ones are going to be the antagonist. So that's one way that you can be really effective as your own editor. So I don't know, Adamma, whether you...
Yeah, I just wanted to say, the more you do it for yourself, the more you get those tools to be a professional writer. Mm-hmm. Because often you have the most time to write your first novel. And if you're lucky enough to get a deal and they want a second book from you, you're not going to have the luxury of a lot of time to write the second book. So it's thinking about what the skills of the craft of writing. What skills do I need in my toolkit? And editing is an author or a writer that can edit, that can do a lot in self-editing is like gold to editors. And it's a really, really useful skill to have, because if you can do that, then your time with your editor will be spent really creatively bringing out other issues, rather than looking at really, if you can get it to a good stage yourself, you will always be in a better position, always.
Brilliant. Yeah, really good advice, Adamma. Absolutely. Great. Yes. So editing in layers, really important. There are a few sort of other little tips and things we can give you about self-editing. One of the things we do like to talk about at Golden Egg is latent processing. It's all of that, the thinking that's going on in the back of your head without you even realizing it. All right. I want you to give yourself time to just, go for a walk if you can, and just try not to necessarily focus on your story, but let it all kind of percolate in the background. Give yourself time to, a few days, and then come back to your manuscript, and suddenly, you will have perhaps come up with a solution to a thorny plot issue that you had, without really concentrating hard on it. It's actually all been going on beautifully in the background. The brain is a wonderful thing, and it doesn't all have to be happening right at the forefront. There can be all sorts going on in the background. So I think one of the things to say is that thinking time is really important. Just because you're not putting pen to paper doesn't mean that that isn't time wasted. All right, and that's you can use that as an excuse sometime if you kind of somebody thinks you look like you're being lazy. I'm just latent processing. It's very important. So yes, latent processing. The other thing to do, and this is really good advice, is once you've got to the end, or if you think that you're at a point, oh, sorry, my phone's going and there's no one in the house to answer it, so we'll just ignore it. Yes, if you put your manuscript to one side for several weeks and come back to it with fresh eyes. So I think that is really important. If you get to a point where you've been working really hard on your manuscript, you can't really see the wood for the trees anymore, then that is the time to say, right, I'm going to put this here and I'm going to write about something completely different, or I'm just not going to think about this at all. And then a few weeks later, you pick it up and you see it in a completely different light. So yes, make sure you give yourself time to do that, because it really will help you. You will look at it as more like an editor would than as a writer does, and it will give you a fresh perspective. The other thing that you can do, again, to try and help give you a fresh perspective, is to actually read your manuscript aloud to yourself. So, you know, an empty room, make sure everyone's out of the house, and actually read your book aloud. And again, you will hear your book in a completely new way, again, more like a reader would than as a writer, and you will hear things that you will potentially want to change. So I think, you know, those are some really hopefully useful things that you can do to help you with editing your own work, because as Adamma said, it's really important to be able to have those skills. You could ask a trusted friend to look at your work as well. I mean, that can be difficult because either they massively pick it apart and well, you know, and you're not really sure what to do next, or all they do is basically do a kind of proofread, which is also not overly helpful. So it kind of depends on the person you're going to get to look at it. But if there is somebody that you know who perhaps knows children's publishing and does a lot of reading as well, then maybe that's somebody who could look at your story and give you a fresh perspective on it. All right.
I just
so
have something to add.
Oh, yes.
On
Yeah.
this. Yeah. On receiving feedback. So sometimes we receive feedback, it's from a trusted source, and we just dive straight into it. But I'd like to encourage you to give yourself time to process it so that you come up with deeper solutions rather than, so sometimes we've done a big edit and in 2 weeks the writer has come back and we instinctively know they've not had enough time to give thought to the areas we've pointed out for development and so on. So really give yourself time to think, you know, so give latent processing, we can't overemphasize it enough, you know, give so that when you're making those changes, you know, you've considered the implications of the changes you're making and you can see how it is developing this manuscript. It is really difficult to get feedback. Even as editors, when we send books out for a second opinion, when we get it, we often have to take some time and come back and read it and go, okay, yeah, I see what they're saying. So be prepared for that. It's a completely natural response. But if you give yourself time, you can work past that and see what you're being asked to consider.
Yeah, absolutely. I think, yeah, it is difficult to get feedback, I think, for everybody, especially when it's your manuscript and it's your baby and it feels precious to you. And so if anybody's going to give you any feedback that isn't, oh my goodness, this is amazing, it needs to be published immediately, then actually, you know, that can be disheartening. But actually, yes, taking the time and allowing your brain to do its thing will really be of benefit, and thinking at a deeper level, instead of that kind of knee-jerk reaction that we all have as human beings to any kind of criticism. You know, it's really important. And actually there seems to be a bit of a theme going on. We keep on, Adamma, talking about take the time. And actually that brings us nicely on to submissions. So we've talked about editing, we've talked about structural editing in layers, we've given you some tips. hopefully once you've done all that, you can start thinking about submitting to agents and publishers. But I think, you know, I'm going to, Adamma's having done lots of submissions with Golden Egg. She's the bit more of the guru on this than I am. But I think the one thing that I will say about submissions is that it's really important not to send your manuscript out before it's ready. All right. You will only get one shot with an agent, really. So don't ruin it by sending them something that's not ready. Take the time. So this is a marathon, it's not a sprint. Okay, take the time, get it right. And only when you really, really feel this is 100% ready, that's the time to actually start sending out to agents and publishers. So yes, Adamma, agents.
So we do want to keep time for questions. I'm going to be quite quick through this, but if there's anything you want to know more about, then we can pick it up in the questions. So research, there's so many agents. So the first place, okay, so what does an agent do? An agent will work out the best publisher for your manuscripts. They will look after the financials, try and get you the best deal. And it's not always about money. It's also about marketing. It's also about, you know, whatever accommodations you might need as a writer. So choosing an agent, it's such an important relationship that it shouldn't just be the first person that says yes. The person has to understand you as a writer, as a person, because it's a really important relationship. So where do we find an agent? The best place is in a handbook called the Writers and Artists Handbook, I think.
Yearbook.
And it's published every year.
Yearbook.
And yearbook, sorry. It's published every year, and there's one specifically for children's writers. And in it, because it's published every year, it's updated. You see the agents, their contact details, what they are looking for, the genres they represent. There's no point sending a book about an adventure book to someone who likes historical. No matter how good your writing is, they will turn it down. And each rejection hurts. You know, it's something you need a lot of resilience for. Mallory Blackman, I think, submitted to 83 people before she got an agent. So it's like Hayley said, it's a marathon. You know, it's a marathon. Think about how you cope with the rejections, because they will come. And remember, it just needs one person to love it. One person. It doesn't matter what 80 other people said. It just needs one person. So when you go through the Artist and Writers Yearbook, choose some agents, look them, most of them on Twitter, look at what they are saying they want. Look at their list, look on their websites, you'll see the books they've represented. Look for common themes, work out whether this is somebody you want to represent you. And then you, once you have your lists, I would say what we advise and which works is choose a handful. Don't go to so many at the same time. Choose a handful so that it's a manageable process. It's back again to the do it in chunks. So make a short list, say 5, 7 agents, look up their, look them up so that you can get your submissions package as tailored as possible to that agent. So when we say submissions package, what we mean is your cover letter. So in your cover letter, think about why you have to show the agent why you think they're a good fit for you. So it might be you've loved something they've done. It might be they've said something on Twitter that you really connected with. Then you put in your pitch for your novel. You have a small space there in that letter to say that. And then you give a little bit about yourself. Why would they want you? What's great about you? And then you have your synopsis. For the synopsis, a lot of people think it's a spoiler-free document. But what I want to say is it's got to encapsulate the whole novel in that one page so that anyone reading it can tell what your book is about. And then depending on the agent, some want the first 3 chapters, some want the first page, some want check, and tailor your submission to them. And then it will take maybe 8 weeks. They will also say how long you should wait and so on. Anyway, I think
Have we
have more time for
have we run out of steam, Adamma? Should we just quickly sum up? Should we just do a quick sum up? Because sometimes that's quite useful, isn't it?
Oh, we do that after the questions, Hayley.
Oh, we do that after questions. Okay,
Yeah.
that's fine. I did see one come up. Hang on. Let me. What are some of the most common mistakes writers make when working with agents?
So one is badgering them. No matter how much they love your book, if you're going to be emailing them at midnight and so on and so forth, they just go, this is too difficult. Mm-hmm. You know, we've had this happen with some writers and they love them and they were like, this relationship is not going to work. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Another is not being, most agents want to know, a lot of the questions were asked is, how does this person take editorial feedback? And they want to know they can work with you in a professional capacity, or they say, oh, this needs working, which is where self-editing comes in. And they don't have to hold your hand through that editing. They can tell you what needs working on, and you can go off and do it and come back, you know? So if they feel that, because it's not that they don't like you or don't love your story, but everyone is so time poor, and they have to make that judgment. Do I have the time to take this on? And a lot of decisions are made because of time, which goes back to the don't submit too early. Because I was recently on a judging panel and there was this book and the publisher said, I like it, but I don't have the time to develop this to the standard it needs. It's a bit too early for me. And that was it. It was a firm favorite. But when you're on the outside, it looks like people don't want to do it. But time is a very scarce commodity in the industry. And so anything that looks like it will become a time suck is a no.
Yeah. I think, Adamma, what you say, you know, it is the importance of that relationship, and you know, that they want to know that, yeah, you're going to make their life certainly not difficult and hopefully easy. Yes, if they feel like you know, you're going to be able to do the editing yourself and you're going to be able to take on board their criticisms and run with it, then you would be in a fantastic, that's the kind of thing that an agent would love, and you're going to be a writer that they'll absolutely be interested in. Definitely. Yeah. So we've had another couple of questions. Are short story submissions good practice for novel writing? I mean, I presume that's sort of thinking about, you know, competitions, and all writing is beneficial. So, you know, whether you're writing short stories and sending them off and getting, you know, exposure, but also just that practice of writing, regular writing, just you know, it's your writing brain, it's a muscle like any other, and the more you use it, the better and the stronger it will be. So definitely short story submissions, competitions, definitely get yourself out there. The other thing, which we haven't really touched upon, that is fantastic, is free writing, and getting into doing regular free writing, you know, just 10 minutes a day even, so fantastic for your writing brain. You know, there's loads of prompts online that will just give you 10 minutes to just write, not thinking about anything else, just putting pen to paper, and you know, that's a really great practice. So the more writing you do, the better you will be at writing. Yeah. Hopefully that answers that question.
Is there a website or some sort of so that's the Writers and Artists Yearbook? I do actually have a copy. It is an electronic version as well. That's the most comprehensive resource. There will be, if you Google, I'm sure there will be some lists, but the most comprehensive, that is the most for the UK. Self-publishing a chat.
Oh, go on, Adamma.
Is it okay for a beginning writer to be self-publishing a chapter of a novel weekly on an online platform like Medium, or it's better to publish traditionally? What do you think, Sarah?
I think that I think it doesn't matter if you publish online. It's not going to be detrimental to your chances of getting published traditionally. I think one of the things that disappoints a lot of people who self-publish is the lack of audience, because as we were talking earlier on about, you know, how you build your audience, how do people know you're there? There is a huge amount published online and you can get lost. Whereas with a traditional publisher whose job it is to promote you, get you into bookshops, get you onto bookshelves, you actually have a much better chance of having your book found. So I'm not against self-publishing. I just feel that it perhaps doesn't deliver as much as people would like it to. Yeah. And that can be terribly disappointing.
Yes, that absolutely makes sense. The industry is difficult enough without further disappointments and trickiness. Yeah.
Questions. I loved both of your presentations just now. Absolutely fantastic. And I'm interested in this idea of protagonists and antagonists, and how one doesn't create stereotypes of the all great protagonist and the all villainous opposites. Yeah. What tips can we give authors to let them create well-rounded and therefore actually much more empathetic characters?
Yeah. Well, I think what you say, you know, about making them well-rounded, I think I had quite an interesting conversation actually with one of my groups the other day, talking about showing, you know, a character's emotions and how to avoid, you know, using stereotypes and I think it's about that deep knowledge of character, isn't it? It's about really knowing them inside out. It's about knowing the flaw inside them that needs to be overcome through the course of the story. It's about knowing the relationships that they have with their family and with their friends, and knowing all that before you begin writing. And if you have that knowledge, you don't necessarily have to have that all on the page, but by having that knowledge and understanding the depth of the character, that will come across, I think. Yeah, I think the other, oh, sorry. I was just going to say the other thing, especially certainly for the protagonist, but also for the antagonist, you know, an antagonist isn't, you need to think about why the antagonist is bad. So, you know, think about the fact that the antagonist is actually the protagonist of their story. So it's not enough for them just to be bad. Why are they bad? What is it about them that has put them in this place? And I think if you can understand them and understand where they're coming from and why they're like that, then that gives you a much greater depth of understanding, and that will also help you, especially for the antagonist. It's not enough for them just to be bad. Why are they bad? Sorry, Adamma.
Yeah, I was just going to talk about the antagonists and thinking, what is it that they want? Thinking really deeply, what is it that they want and why? Pay more attention to why they want this thing they want. And in terms of helpful tips, thinking about character exercises you can do off your manuscripts and really puts in your characters. Something I always say to a lot of my writers is write a scene with a happy day, because our characters are facing a problem and so on. Write a scene where they are happy. What makes them happy? How are they happy? So that we know how they'll respond when they are not happy. Because sometimes my writers have not thought about it at all. It's just like, oh, this is the problem. Their parent has died, they're this, and it's thinking about them as a whole human being. And so doing lots of, and there's so many online, lots of little character exercises to really get that deep engagement with your character so you know them inside out will help, because we don't want, people are not perfect. We might think we are, but we're not. And thinking about what is true in this situation. You know, so you snatch something from your best friend. What prompted the snatching? Is always, if you think, always ask why.
Yeah,
always be sure about the why.
Brilliant. Thank you so much. That's really helpful. I mean, because something that I say to people is that if a character's too good, they're kind of hard to care about, because you feel that you can't empathize with them in quite the same way. And if a villainous character is all villainous and doesn't, for example, love their mother, again, they become just like a cardboard cutout. This character.
Yeah.
Think all the way around. Think about the back, front, and sides.
Yes, absolutely.
Somebody's asked, if you're writing a sequel during submission, do you write the synopsis for the first book in the series or all the books in the series? If you're writing a series.
So it is very rare that a publisher will take on a book on a series basis. Most often what happens, even so you could say in your letter, this works as a standalone book with series potential. And they might ask you about it. And that's the point when it's appropriate to say. But now with the way the market is so competitive, no one will, in fact, we just had a coffee morning with agents during the week. And the consensus was trilogies are out, duologies are in. So no one will, but then so usually because nobody will take that market risk on a series, the first book has to provide a satisfying, and it has to work as a standalone book. We have an alumni at Golden Egg who wrote this amazing book. And then she was shortlisted for a prize and everything. And they said, write up a synopsis for a sequel and something else. I think she was with Scholastic, and she did. And they went, we'll go with the something else. And then it was only book 3 or 4 that she was allowed to write the sequel to the next one. So it really has to work as a standalone. I would say, make sure all you say is it's got series potential. And then if they're interested, the conversation will come out of that. And so if you say it has serious potential, you also need to be prepared to back that up.
But if you think about long series like the Harry Potter series, each book works on its own. So they're almost like chapters within a bigger book, because obviously there's a very strong narrative arc throughout the 7 books, but each book works absolutely on its own. So as part of your editing process, you've got to keep that one in mind too. Let me see. One last question, I think. We're nearly 5 to. How long is a pitch? How long is a synopsis? And how long is a bio?
Okay.
I'm going to leave this with you, Adamma, because this is, again, it's more you.
A pitch, the clearer you can communicate your entire novel, the better. And which brings us to the one-line pitch. Can you sell your novel in one line? And so, for instance, it's a good few years ago now at London Book Fair, the agent for Sam Copeland's agent, we had a meeting with her and she said, oh, I've got this exciting book coming. And it was Charlie Changes into a Chicken. And it stuck with me. It stayed with me because she said, so this boy changes into animals and when he's anxious and the school play is coming.
Oh, brilliant.
And it stayed with me since then, you know? And so when it came out, I bought it for my children because it had stayed with me. So it's thinking, how can you, I went to a talk once and someone said, Die Hard, but with fairies, and that was Artemis Fowl. So how are you communicating this novel that makes people go tell me more? So that's a pitch. With the synopsis, we say 1 page, 1 A4. Some agents are saying even shorter. Some are saying 500-word synopsis. So it really, which is why where your research comes in. It really depends. But there is that need to be able to communicate your novel as succinctly as possible. So think about, it's really good practice. Think about, I'd say standard pitch is maybe 3 lines, but you must be able to communicate it in 1 line for success. That's what I would say. Bios, we say 2, 3, 4 sentences, we say.
Perfect. We've got a great question here, and I'm going to use the last few minutes. So Edu, who is somebody that we know well at Accord, says, do you think pieces of fiction like Game of Thrones, Attack on Titan, The Wire, etc. have changed storytelling? These pieces of fiction show morally complex characters or characters and do away with good or bad characters. Is this something that is here to stay? And is there a shift towards more moral complexity? Was this just a blip?
Oh, I mean, I think I hope it's not just a blip, because I think it is important. I think, you know, antagonists who do have that complexity, and you can't decide to actually, maybe I kind of, I sympathize with the antagonist a little bit, and you're kind of really torn then as to how you should be feeling. Those are great antagonists, aren't they? They really make you think. So yes, yeah, potentially all these things, I think certainly Netflix and the storytelling that's coming out of there at the moment, it is all feeding into all these other types of media. And certainly just as an example, Bridgerton, which was, you know, absolute massive hit at the beginning of this year, loads of agents after that asking for, you know, I remember a tweet from an agent saying, I want a YA Bridgerton, who's got one? You know, send it to me now. So yes, these, you know, these kind of things, they will feed into the book industry. And yes, I think for my part, I would say yes, these more complex villains, not necessarily your Marvel type villains or your James Bond type villains, who perhaps are just bad for the sake of being bad. They're actually a bit more, you know, more complex. And I think probably, I haven't seen the new James Bond, but I would have said, I suspect, you know, I think the complexity of the villains in those films has actually increased over the course of the 50-year franchise or however long it's been going on. I don't know, Adamma, what do you think?
I think, yes, we always want complex characters. And I think maybe that's where fiction, the novel form, is really good, as opposed to a film that is 90 minutes and so on. And so you have space, and that's what brings the well-rounded characters like we've been talking about. The other thing I wanted to touch on very briefly is that with children's books, we always want that sense of hope and that sense that the child has some agency. And so that's, I would say, quite an important feature of children's books. You know, just, oh, it's not all doom and gloom, and there is hope, and children have a voice and they have agency. And we're creating that safe place. I would say there are no themes we can't grapple with children's books, but it's doing it in a safe way for the children, which is with that element of hope and so on. But I'm all for complex characters.
Mm-hmm.
Fantastic. Well, hope is always a good point to finish on.
Yes.
The best books finish on hope. I am going to run a little bit over because I want you very quickly, Adamma, maybe you can do this, is tell us how Golden Academy works, Golden Egg Academy, and if any of the authors present today want to be in touch with you, what do they expect? How do you select? How does it work? Is there a financial arrangement?
Okay, so with Golden Egg Academy, we have courses for children's writers. We have a 12-week course which runs twice a year. One just started, and I think the next one is in April or May, April maybe. And it's not selective, it's the real nuts and bolts, what real the basics, because we found there was a need for it. And it's 12 weeks, it's with Imogen, our founder. And from there, you have a chance to be selected to the 12 months, which is selective. And that is for 12 months, and that's with Hayley and myself and some of the other editors. And we do weekly exercises, we look at your manuscript in detail and in overview structurally, all sorts of things. And then you might go on to mentoring and then come through the submissions process. That's how it works in a nutshell. And there is a cost to all of it. But we have the Golden Egg Award, which is open to writers from underrepresented backgrounds. And we run that twice a year for a place on the 12-week course. We also have the Golden Egg Club, which is a club anyone can join. We open it periodically. It's just closed again, sorry. I think it will be next open in January maybe. But we have editors who come in to do, we come in and we do weekly live
sessions, yeah.
And then we have someone from the industry come once a month, an author, a published author, an editor, an agent, a publisher, and so on. And that's a small cost, which is £12.
£12, yeah,
a month.
So.
But the Golden Egg Award is completely free. So what we do, we have 2 places on each course, on the 12-week course. So I encourage you to apply. I could send a message to our code when it's next open. I run the Golden Egg Award. So I will make a note and I'll send a message when it's next on, but it will be in January, I think. It will open in January. And then the runners up will get a 6-month place in the club, which is just community, other writers, and so on. And we're always looking for, sometimes we have sponsors that will help a talented writer, do the later stages and so on. So it's something we take very, very seriously. For people on this masterclass today, you can email me at Adamma@Golden Egg Academy, and I will do my best within my time constraints to advise you. This is just because you're my brothers and sisters.
I've just added a link to the 12-week course in the chat. So if anybody wants to have a little look and see what it is that Adamma's been talking about, and you're right, Adamma, it's April 2022 is the next time that one will be running.
Well, oh goodness, thank you both so much. What a brilliant session. I think we all got so much from it. I've made pages of notes.
Well, thank you for having us.
Thank you for having us. We're delighted to be here.
We'll ask you again next time.
Okay. Good stuff.